Dageho. This is hello everyone. Dage is everyone or all the people. He is good. So Dageho. So first of all, before we get into it, it's important to know who I am because I'm not talking about this from a native speaker perspective. So I'm Israel, I'm from Hong Kong. I'm first of all a composer. I just finished my second year of PhD 2 days ago. So glad to be here on my holiday. Thank you. Not the whole thing though, just the second year. I write music for concerts and films, but that's not the main thing here. So I've been running a language blog since 2015. It's called Rhapsody in Lingo. And then during COVID, I started a YouTube channel of the same name. And also in the same year, me and two of my friends started a podcast in Cantonese about languages and linguistics. That will be the topic of my other talk, but not this one. So, as a disclaimer, I don't represent native speakers, Taiwanese people, or anything from that culture. I'm just a learner of the language. I come from a place that is, in many ways, similar to Taiwan, culturally, politically, but also quite different. So, I'll be speaking from my own experience. So, a bit of housekeeping. This is not me teaching you Taiwanese. I'm not good enough to actually do that. This is not a linguistics talk. There will be some linguistics, but it's not the main thing. Especially, there's not a political commentary, because when you talk about minority languages like this, there's always some politics involved. So I try to avoid that, even though it's really hard. So I'll tell you what you need to know if you were to start learning the language today, especially from a polyglot perspective, like you want to get all the difficult things out of the way, right? My experience of learning and interacting with the language and the culture, and if we have time, then we might try to do some phrases, but we'll see about that. So we'll just get started. Before I start, I want to introduce two people to you. These are quite important figures inside the online community surrounding Taiwanese. The first guy is called Hua Sai. He is a Taiwanese person who is of that heritage that speaks Taiwanese, but he didn't grow up speaking it for reasons that I will get into later. And then a few years ago, he decided he will learn Taiwanese and then never speak Mandarin ever again. So he got viral because of that. Now he's one of the Taiwanese influencers, Taiwanese language influencers. And the other guy is called Yong. He is from America. He lives in Taiwan. He's learned the Taiwanese language to an astonishing level. So he also does like online things. So more about that later. First of all, you might wonder why it's called Taiwanese, or whether that's the correct name or not. First of all, yes, Taiwanese is a language. It is one of the Sinitic or Chinese languages, but it is quite far removed from Mandarin that you might know about. So if you look at the lineage, it goes from Sinitic and it goes to Min, which in Taiwanese would be Ban, and then Southern Min, or in Mandarin Min Nan, and then Taiwanese Ban Lam. And it goes to Hokkien, which is a name that you might be familiar with. It's Hokkien, same thing in Hokkien. And then Taiwanese, I would argue that is a dialect of Hokkien. And in Taiwanese, you call that Daigi, or Taiwan, where Taiwan is actually Taiwan, as you can see. So one special thing about the Min branch is that it diverged very early on from the rest of the Chinese languages. So most Chinese languages that you know of, Mandarin, Cantonese, etc., diverge from Middle Chinese, whereas Min split off a bit earlier than that in Old Chinese. So there are some sound changes that will be quite different from other Chinese languages. So in current Taiwan, 73% of the Sinitic population are ethnically Hokkien, or whatever you call that. 12% is Hakka, which is the other group that you might know in Taiwan. Note that I said ethnically. I don't know how to use this pointer. Oh, there you go. Because most of them actually don't speak the language. They come from that heritage, but most people now speak Mandarin in their day-to-day lives. So I said that Taiwanese is a dialect of Hokkien because it has some special changes, especially in the vocabulary aspect, because the Japanese colonial history of Taiwan. They have more lexical influence from other languages, mainly through Japanese. So if you know any Japanese, you might know that Japanese has a lot of European words in it, and that sort of came over to Taiwanese. So for example, I'm going to give on this thing. Pan, that would be bread from Portuguese. Kurimu, it's from cream, but it means butter. We have unjiang, which is short for untenshu jiang, and means driver. Otobai, do anyone know what that is? Motorbike, otobai. Kanban, that is an actual Japanese word, wasei kango, and it means like a billboard. And that last one is a calque, which means they use the same characters, but they use the Taiwanese pronunciation for it. In Japanese, I think it's Boeing? Yeah, sorry, my Japanese is not that good anymore. And in Taiwanese, it's bang. So same characters, but they actually is from Japanese. The next thing, is it the language of Taiwan? I would say no. Is it the language of Taiwan? That's the focus here. Because there's a lot of debate. Even when I announced that I was doing this talk, lots of people were messaging me saying, it is not the language of Taiwan. You should not call that Taiwanese. And the argument here is that Taiwanese doesn't mean that it is the language of Taiwan. First of all, if you look at current usage in Taiwan, most people, 66% of people in 2020 use Mandarin in their day-to-day lives, and only 30% use Taiwanese in any capacity. So that's actually already quite optimistic. And then you have the other languages of Taiwan, like Hakka and the indigenous languages. So it's not the dominant language. And also, obviously, Taiwan has all the indigenous languages that I mentioned. So those are the Austronesian languages. And as far as I know, Taiwan is the source of all those languages. So they started migrating from that island. So there's an incredible diversity of languages on Taiwan. So lots of people say, yeah, they should be called Taiwanese, not Hokkien. But some arguments for calling it Taiwanese, one of them is that before Mandarin took over, it was the most dominant language. So if you look at this very cool historical epic called Sekalu, it depicts life in Taiwan in the 19th century, and where the different groups lived, well, in sense, in harmony, not very much, but in a certain sense. They worked with each other, they spoke each other's languages, and back then, Taiwanese would have been the dominant language. And so especially if you look at the etymology of Taiwan, so it doesn't come from Taiwanese, it comes from other indigenous languages. But where this name came from, the original area that was called Taiwan, is the area where Taiwanese is most widely spoken. So when I say it's called Taiwanese, it means it shares the same lexical root as Taiwan. It does not mean the language of Taiwan. So in terms of mutual intelligibility, so you might know that sort of the synergetic group is sort of just several huge dialect continua. If you look at just across the sea from Taiwan, in Xiamen, or Emeng in Hokkien, the mutual intelligibility is very high. I have watched some TV from Xiamen, and I understand it quite well. And then you have Teochew, which is also from Southern Min, Fuzhou from Eastern Min. So there is some level of intelligibility, but not very high. We can try that later, Heng. And then when you go to the other Chinese branches, Cantonese, Hakka, etc., we don't understand each other. But there are some similarities among all the southern Chinese languages. And then if you go to Mandarin, it becomes even lower because there are some sound changes that took place in the north that didn't take place elsewhere. But at the same time, because everyone speaks Mandarin, if they speak Hokkien, they understand it perfectly. So is Taiwanese a dialect of Minnan? Is Swedish a dialect of Scandinavian? Is Montenegrin a dialect of Serbo-Croatian? It doesn't matter, really. I think it's a moot point. So for this talk, or just in my daily life, I just respect what the native speakers tell me. I just call it what they want to call it. So they call it Daigi, so I call it Taiwanese. But you can call it any other thing you like. So how is it like currently? First of all, in Taiwan, if you say mother tongue, Beji or Muyu in Mandarin, it means something different from what we say here. When we say mother tongue, we usually say, or the language of mother or your family, the one you spoke growing up. But for Taiwanese people, when they say buggy or mother tongue, or I think Singapore as well, they usually mean their ancestral tongue, their heritage language. So that's why you see people learning their mother tongue, which doesn't make much sense to us, but that's what they do. And in Taiwan, more recently, there's a policy called bilingual country. They want to make Taiwan bilingual in English and an unknown second language. So the government refuses to say what the other language is. So it could be Mandarin, it could be anything. It could be French for all we know. And I call it a minoritized language, which is a term that I got from Richard Simcott, because it implies that it is a process. It was minoritized by something else, by something anyway. So currently, the older generation, they are native in the language, and it's the same pattern you see in many languages that are sort of minoritized. Most adults were brought up in Mandarin, but they understand Taiwanese to a certain degree, and then the younger generation has very little exposure, except they know that, oh, it's my grandma's language. Sometimes they use certain phrases when they're speaking Mandarin, so more on that later. But currently, more recently, I think there is a renewed interest in the language. People are learning it, are talking about it. I think that has something to do with politics, but I said not to go into that now. So take from that what you will. Currently, historically, they didn't teach Taiwanese or any other minority languages. It was only Mandarin because that's a government's language, especially since the Republic of China. But more recently, there's a development of National Languages Act. It confirms that these are our national minority languages, including Taiwanese, Hakka, and also like indigenous languages, sign language, and so on. So supposedly, in the future, pupils will have to choose one of them to learn in school. But not quite yet. So generally, if you talk to the people there, they don't know much about the languages. So they know that it's what their grandparents speak, and that's basically it. So they wouldn't have known anything about the grammar or anything about the languages, or even like basic concepts, whether it can be written. There are also official stations in Taiwanese now on television. So there's Gongsu Daigi Tai, which is something I watch quite often, and Daisu Daigi Tai. These are also on YouTube, if anyone's interested. So it's quite accessible compared to certain other national stations in other countries. Everything's on YouTube. So what does this mean for us if we want to learn the language? First of all, it's really hard to find someone to speak to, obviously, especially if you want to speak to someone who doesn't mix like 50% Mandarin into their Taiwanese. Most people would do that. So where you have to go is like online communities, instead of like just going to Taiwan and finding a random person to talk to. Another thing is that it's not abundant, there's not a lot of content in Taiwanese, but there is a sufficient amount. As I said, the stations are on YouTube, it's very accessible, but it's mostly news programs or anything along those lines. But when it comes to Taiwanese dramas, as in Taiwanese language dramas, they are quite limited. Mostly like dramas depicting real life, gets the sort of the stereotype of the language. If you want to find something else, it's a bit harder. The historical epic that I showed you earlier is sort of the exception. And if you want to ask a Taiwanese speaker, how do you say this, how do you say that, or how does this sentence work? A good amount of time they're not going to be able to answer you, because especially with words, they're going to say, I don't know, we just used a Mandarin word, so I have no idea, or they don't know how the sentence works. And even when I take Taiwanese lessons with teachers who teach it, all I can do is to ask them, how would you say this, and then try to copy that, and I would like look it up, or she would actually look it up as well during the lesson. So next thing I want to talk about is the writing systems, because it's quite interesting. It has a plethora of writing systems. So a reminder, in ancient China, most people were taught to, people who were taught anything anyway, people were taught to write the lingua franca. So most of it was classical Chinese. And then since a century ago, it became Mandarin Chinese, or standard written Chinese as we call it. So most people just weren't able to write their own mother tongues. And when it comes to Taiwanese, it was hardly ever standardized. Just they have conventions of how to write it, just among people, but there's like no official standardization, no Alliance Française or whatever. So the first one I want to talk to you about is the one that I'm using in this presentation, called Beiweidi. So it is created by missionaries to Taiwan, as is often the case with Asian languages. So it is using the Romanized script. Another name is hence 教會羅馬字. 羅馬 meaning Roman, like Romaji in Japanese. 教會 means church. So it is a script that is used by the churches. And note that it is meant as a standalone writing system. People wrote books in it. People wrote newspapers in it. It is not an auxiliary system to accompany the Chinese characters. So if you look at this system, you might be a bit confused by some things. For example, they mark aspiration in the consonants. So they have g, k, d, t, b, p, d, t. And not h, th, f, or whatever. So you might ask, why don't you use G, D, B, and J? Because interestingly, they have other sounds for those. They have g, b, and z. So it's already taken. And another thing is they have nasal sounds, and they use the little N on top. More on that later again. And they have the and O. So you see the font's not working here because they have really weird Unicode characters, and the font doesn't support it. But this or in the dialect that I learned, some people say o, etc. But so those are two different phonemes. And then they have a tone that is a really weird dot on top of the vowel. So I'll give you an example. 我下晡已經第一場會議加謝. So I have already taught at a conference this afternoon. So you have the funny dots on top of vowels, you have the N on top, etc. So the second one is called Dai which is short for Taiwan Le Maji. Taiwan is Taiwan. Le Maji, again, Romaji. In Dai it will be written with a U instead of an O. So this is a script created by the Taiwanese Ministry of Education. It is a revision of what we had just now, Beiweidi. It is meant to promote standardization of the language, but this is, relatively speaking, more intended as an auxiliary system, as in like pinyin, to help you learn the Chinese characters. So the main differences from Beiweidi are actually not that many. They replace the CHs with TSs. So actually, they're both like a bit ugly. So in Beiweidi, you have too many H's. You have CHH. And then in Dai Le, you have TSH, but you also have like T and TH. So you see lots of words that start with T's. And they replace the weird O with a dot with double O's, OA, OE with UA, UE. So some people suspect so that it looks like more like pinyin. That's the conspiracy. They replace ENG with ING. Again, looks more like pinyin. Because this is a ing sound, and the ing. So you decide whether it sounds more like an E or an I. But if we have something similar in Cantonese, where we write ing, but phonetically speaking, it's like an E sound. And the tones are different places. So let's look at the example. Same example, different system. So no more weird dots and N's on top, and they have more U's and more T's. So you might ask, why don't we use Chinese characters since it's Chinese language? So first, before we get into that, this is how Chinese characters work, but because we're short on time, just remember that Chinese writes meanings mainly, and not like actual sounds that you say. So it can be transferred across different languages to retain the same meaning. And also, written Mandarin was not a thing was not a mainstream thing until a century ago. So first of all, this is the third system I'm introducing. They have a conventional system of Chinese characters. So it has a long history. Again, as I said, it's conventionalized, not official. In terms of content words, like nouns and verbs, they're mostly consistent with other Chinese languages because of how they write meaning. But some function words look a bit weird to you if you speak Mandarin, Cantonese, and so on. And to me, as a Cantonese speaker, it looks very hard to read. And it's also relatively rare nowadays. Usually it's just some activists who use it. So for example, this is iking. If you speak Mandarin, if you write Mandarin, this looks wrong. It's not supposed to be this one. D. This doesn't, the character itself doesn't have anything to do with location. It means like to rule. And then this has a funny font, if you have read traditional Chinese before. So yeah. And then this Ayong that I mentioned earlier. Sorry, these are all like anti-vax rants, but he tweets in this script. And yeah, that's why it's hard to read for me, but I think it is cool that they have a convention like this. Next one, again, promoted by the Ministry of Education, and it's standardized. So this one is etymologically designed, which means if a word comes from this common root, which is shared with Mandarin, Cantonese, and so on, they're going to use the same character. So for me, as a Cantonese speaker, it's very easy to read, with some exceptions, because they have words unique to them. But some people think it's colonial because it looks more like Mandarin. Again, I'm not going to go into that. But yeah, so personally, I prefer this one, obviously, because in Cantonese, we are used to the knowledge, the understanding that one character can have different meanings, different pronunciations in different languages. But apparently, as far as I know, Taiwanese people are more used to just one character having the Mandarin pronunciation. And that's why they find it harder to accept that, oh, this same character can also mean this sound in Taiwanese. So the same example again. So you see this one, it is consistent with Mandarin. The font is more normal. This is the characters that are promoted by the Ministry of Education. And it looks weird to other Chinese language speakers, but it is the standardized character. And this one as well. This one, if you know this character, it's from classical Chinese. Don't know if that's etymologically consistent. Another one is mixing them all together, and a lot of activists are promoting this one. So they put the Chinese script and the Roman script together, so one of the Roman scripts anyway. It's a bit like in Japanese, you mix kanji and hiragana and katakana, and for different functions within the same text. But in Taiwanese, it's more arbitrary because some people decide maybe it's function words, I would use romanization, and other words I would use characters. It's not standardized at all. So a random example, I change a preposition to romanization, and then it means a, and I use romanization for that, and the sentence final particle, that just expresses your attitude. That is also in romanization. And then the last one I want to talk about is this one that gets on my nerves. I call it ad hoc Mandarin-based approximation, plus some Juyin, which is the like kana for Taiwan, which means they think about the sound in Taiwanese, and then they find the Mandarin word that sounds similar to that sound, and they write the Mandarin word. And so it is quite unrecognizable. Sometimes when they happen to sound similar, it's going to be the same characters. But generally, especially for longer texts, it is very hard to read. And people generally use it when they're writing in Mandarin, but they want to use one set phrase in Taiwanese. And it's mainly because, yeah, they think that one character only has a Mandarin pronunciation. Basically, they are using the characters like they are some sort of syllabary, like a kana. So they try to fit this into that other language. And that's because people are not taught how to write in Taiwanese at all. So I'm very bad at this script. I can't even read it, let alone write it. But here is an example I tried. Wa, that means there's like just a sound. And then you see this. This looks like katakana. There's actually juin, that means a, like katakana. Bo, it means ball, doesn't have anything to do with it. Oh, it means wave, sorry. This is the ironic one because the character means several, but they use it to represent one. So it is quite confusing. I don't even know how to how to write this, so skip that. So as I said, they like to use this script for some set phrases from Taiwanese when they are speaking or writing Mandarin. So most of them are going to be swears, because they like to swear in Taiwanese. It is the uncultured language. And this is what they write. This has no meaning at all in Chinese. And then this is the version of the Chinese script that is promoted by the Ministry of Education. And if you speak Mandarin, you read and write Mandarin, this is going to be obvious to you. This means idiot. But this means nothing. North 7, no idea, because it's just a sound. And also some other common phrases are written in this way. Paise means sorry, and then dong suan. It happens a lot when they have elections. It means to be elected. So elect, something like that. They yell that, and then they write this, which means cold garlic. Yeah, actually, they put that on the giant screen when they have elections. This one, you might know if you're into Chinese internet culture. It's basically spread all over the Sinosphere. So originally, it means to reveal smelly stuff, 吐槽. But now it means just to reprimand or to criticize, and it's been imported into Mandarin using this character, these characters, which just don't mean much in Mandarin. The last option is just write Mandarin and just mentally convert it into Taiwanese when you read it. And obviously it's really hard because it's not precise. You have to guess what they're trying to express. It's like us Cantonese speakers, when we write in Mandarin and then we mentally translate it when we pronounce it. So this is just Mandarin. Another thing about the script is that they have multiple readings, more so than most other Chinese languages. So this is called the literary reading, bun tak, and the vernacular reading, bei tak. So for the same character, for example, this is ha, this is e, same character, same meaning, different readings, because they have different functions. So for example, usually for more abstract meanings, they have the literary reading. For more concrete meanings, they have the vernacular reading. And sometimes when you have compound words, you have the literary reading. Single syllable words, you have vernacular reading. It's a bit like Japanese. When you have the compound words, it's always onyomi. And then the single words, it's the kunyomi. And in general, the literary reading sounds more similar to other Chinese languages because it was imported after they split from the other Chinese languages. And when it comes to university, it's funny because both of the characters have both readings. Oh, sorry. And it's pretty arbitrary which one they use. So one university might be called something something Daihak, and the other one would be called something something Dua. And you have to remember which is which. One example is the numbers. So all of them have two readings except 7. So the first one is the vernacular reading, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10. And the second one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So if anyone knows other Chinese languages, the second one is going to sound more similar. So when they use it, it's hard. Like, for example, if you talk about phone numbers, literary reading, counting things, vernacular reading, time vernacular reading, room numbers, literary reading, calendar year, like 2023, literary reading, but if you use the Taiwanese, the government system, I think it's like 90-something, that is the vernacular reading. Skip this. So let's go to the sounds of the language. As I said, they have some sounds that I think are relatively unique to this language within the Chinese family. So they have the di, the z, di. They have many renditions. Some people say di like the Japanese are, but I say di. This means character. Second one is the b. And in most, at least in Cantonese and Mandarin, we don't have this sound. We have the b and the p. We don't have the b. The Taiwanese has it, or Hokkien has it anyway. And then they have the g. Again, we don't have it in our languages. Giyan for language. But in contemporary Taiwanese, because of people often mixing it with Mandarin, they're slowly losing these sounds. So it becomes a l and a m and a y. So for example, bei bai means not bad. In the ad hoc Mandarin approximation that I mentioned, they write mei mai, becomes an M instead of the B. Because I think historically speaking, the b came from the m, or at least it corresponds to the m in other Chinese languages. They have the ng in the initial position, like we do in Cantonese, but it's only for the literary readings because it came from the later borrowings. And one interesting thing to note is they don't have any sort of F. It's like Korean and Filipino, I guess. So that's why Fujian, that's Mandarin. In Hokkien, it's Hokkien. And that's why Sherlock Holmes is called, in Mandarin, it's called Fuermosu. Sorry, by bad Mandarin. I don't think it's through Hokkien, but I think there's influence from Hokkien. That's why they took the F sound, because it's an H in Hokkien. And France is Huat Gok. Again, no F. And at the end of syllables, they have stops like Cantonese, but they have two kinds of stops. And the earlier ones got all merged into the glottal stop, like uh-oh, like I don't know, like we do in the UK, right? Lots of glottal stops everywhere, water. So these are examples. I give you the Cantonese pronunciation as reference because we have the PTK stops. So for zip, they have ji. Yut, they have gui. Hawk, they have But these are only in the vernacular readings. And in the PTK, they re-entered the language, especially in the literary readings, but not necessarily. So you see that compound words. Compound words, they have the literary readings. So zip sao, they have jiap xiu, the P came back. Mat yut, which means, sorry, the first one means accept, the second one means honeymoon. Mat yut, they say biguat, the T came back. This is literature, we say man ho, they say bun ha. So they all came back. And they have nasal endings, like we do in like French and Portuguese, which is really interesting. So as I said earlier, this is the calc from Japanese, byoin. They have bang, bang with the nasal sounds. This one means how, and they say zua yu, zua yu. And yeah, so they can make everything nasal. It mostly comes from the ending nasal consonants, and NM and ng, and it became the nasal because they got lazy probably. And this is a filler word that is in like every single sentence in Taiwanese ever. It's ho. Just say a sentence and end it with ho. Wa ho. This is funny stuff. Yay. Tones. How many tones do you think it has? Yeah, I know that. Officially, it's 8 tones, which is already more than anything else you might know. More detail later. There are 2 light tones. Mandarin has 1 light tone, Taiwanese has 2 that function differently. And then add 1 for the double tone sandi or the combined tones. So that's a lot. So how many is it? So it varies a lot by dialect, but as you said, in most dialects in Taiwan nowadays, it's 7 tones because 2 of the official tones have merged. But for some reason, they still teach 8 tones. And they really value the dialectal diversity. That's why if you look at like list of how to pronounce things, they have like all the different dialects. So what is commonly taught, especially to foreigners, are these 8 tones. As I said, 2 of them have merged. Namely the 6th one and the 2nd one. So they sound the same now, but they used to be different. So there is a common mnemonics. Doesn't matter what it means, but it shows you how they sound. And more importantly, this mnemonic is very cleverly chosen because it has a sentence structure that avoids the tone sandi, as in the tone changes. So these are all the original tones, no change at all. And then that's the 9th tone. That is the double tone sandi. For example, when you have 3 of the same characters put together, this is originally ang. If you put 2 of them together, it's ang ang. If you put 3 of them together, it's ang ang ang. It means very, very red. So it's slightly different from this one. It's a bit higher, apparently. And yeah, speaking of tone sandi, it is very fun. So some people say that the tones swap. Other people say that they don't swap. It's just, it sounds different. So I don't want to argue about that, but it's very dialect dependent again. I'm going to teach you the one that I was taught, which is they swap places. So you have 8 tones here. First of all, the 2nd tone, becomes The becomes The becomes The becomes So you have a full circle, yay. And then the becomes as well. So lots of when you speak it. And they have these 2 ones. These are the checked tones. As in they are shorter, they end with the glottal stop or the PTK. And what they do is, at least in the dialect that I was taught, 8 is higher, 4 is lower, they swap. So 4 becomes high, 8 becomes low. But this is only for the PTK. If they have the glottostop, they lose the glottostop, and they become a different tone. And there you have the full map. And this is only one of the ways that they change. They have like exceptions for like diminutives and so on. So when does it occur? Everywhere. Like 90% of everything you hear has been changed. So when does it not occur? At the end of phrase. So for example, a subject noun phrase. For example, many languages 近在语言. I use the hash to mean it's the original tone because everything else has been changed. Instead of 近在语言, it's 近在语言. And then exception, the subject pronouns, 我, 咱, why is I, 咱 is inclusive we, all of us. They change. If you have a verb and an object, the predicate, for example, as I said earlier, 教册, I teach. The last one is the original tone, the other one is changed. And then preposition phrase, at a conference, 的会议, the is changed, 会 is changed. 议 is the original one. And then your light tones and like other random things. So it's might be the hardest thing to learn in Taiwanese. First of all, you have to know the tones, and then you have to know how they change, and then when they change. And I've yet to master that part of it. So how have I learned it so far? Mostly, there is an intuition that I used when I was learning Mandarin, and then I can sort of map those tones to the Cantonese tones systematically. But also, it's all about input, because in the beginning, I was learning it through Glossica, not sponsored. I just listened to lots of sentences. And back then, I hadn't even been taught the tone changes. I had no idea how they worked. But I knew that was a thing, and then I just sort of absorbed it through lots of input and like observing things. Do we have time? Okay, now let's be democratic. Do you want to speak some Taiwanese, or do you want to ask questions? No, okay. Well, I'm going to decide then. I'm going to go speak in Taiwanese. So, common greeting in lots of Chinese languages is "Have you eaten?" And that is "Jia ba bei." Jia ba bei. Yeah. Notice the ba, b, and the b, different sounds. Jia ba, eat, full, and then bei is not yet. So it is a common thing in all Chinese languages. When you ask a yes/no question, you give a positive option and a negative option. So your answers are 假吧 and bei. So I've eaten myself full, and then I haven't. So my name is, what is your name? 你叫什么名? You called what name? 你叫什么名? 我叫做 And then Isiklet. Isiklet is the country, Israel. Isiklet. So, does anyone want to try? Anyone? No? Okay. I'm sad. Why? You don't have to be afraid of being saying it wrong. Another way is why miaxi. My is the possessive. So, why my? Mia is name. Xi is like Mandarin shi. Why miaxi? Why miaxi Isiklet? And I still want to leave some time for questions, so I'm going to skip the rest. Oh, wait, I want to tell you about this. Because Taiwanese can be written with just romanization and no Chinese characters. Unlike Mandarin, for example, it's not confined by the Chinese characters, because when you transcribe a name into Mandarin or Cantonese, you have to find the closest available character. But if you write everything as romanization, you can just find the closest way to express it in that romanization. So this is tereshin. Exactly tereshin. Yeah, the L is like the Japanese R. And that wouldn't be able to write in Chinese characters. And I think that's very interesting. So, lan, inclusive we, all of us. Lan di Poland, we are in Poland. Lan di Poland. And then you can say lan di tereshin. And I'm going to skip to the end now. Oh, sorry, just last one thing. If you speak Mandarin, if you ever wondered why Sweden is 瑞典. It doesn't have to be Hokkien. I don't know which language it came from, but in certain other Chinese languages, 瑞 is pronounced with a swa. That's why Sweden is 水电 in Taiwanese, and in Switzerland is 水苏. And that's why in Mandarin you have the weird R sound. So that is the end, 德下, and you can find me on these channels. That is my channel, that is my podcast. So do we have time for questions? Maybe like just one or two. So thank you very much. Okay, here we go. Do the Aboriginal languages of Taiwan have any influence on Taiwanese? Oh, you have to ask a linguist for that. As far as I know, not much. Even if there is any, there's not much, which is quite different from like Malaysian Hokkien and other varieties. I would think it's because Taiwanese was pretty dominant back then. It's the high register language, and that's why there's less influence. But don't quote me on that. When Taiwanese is taught, what is the preferred writing system? Is there an official teaching writing system? So it is not widely taught yet, but because it's the official curriculum, they are going to use the Ministry of Education ones, which I assume is going to be the officially promoted Chinese characters plus 代了, which is the newer version of the Roman script. And in general, because there are resources from the government that help you learn it, and those resources also use these systems. And they promote that you start learning the sounds through the Roman system, 代了, and then you sort of fit them into the corresponding Chinese characters. And yeah, so if there is no other, oh wait, another one. Taiwanese, Vietnamese, Thai, more than, is that a question? That's not phrased as a question. That's a statement. But as far as I know, they are not closely related at all. But there is a theory that southern China, which includes Fujian, Hokkien, and Canton, Guangdong, it has a substrate of some older language that is related to the South East Asian languages. So there might be something there. As in, like, we used to speak a language that is similar to Vietnamese, and then we got taken over by the Sinitic languages, and that's why it sounds a bit similar. It's like why French sounds so different from other Latin languages. But that's a theory, and I don't know if there's more to that, because they sound quite different to me. But they look similar because of the romanization, right? It's Taiwanese and Vietnamese. Are there slightly sounds? Oh, slightly prenasalized sounds. Yeah, as I said, they don't have a de. They don't have de. They only have b and g. But to me, the g tends to sound a little bit like a nasal. It sounds a bit like ng, just a little bit. So instead of gi gian, it sounds more like yi yan, and that's why people sort of turn that into the y. But it's not like a strong b. I actually, when I was learning, I had to just find the right balance. It's not b, it's not b, it's somewhere in between. It's just a b. And one way to approach that sound, especially the b sound, as a learner, is to think of it as like a variation of m. So I'm thinking m, but I say b. And your favorite TV media channel for consuming content in Taiwanese? Just personally, I'm very bad at watching dramas or any sort of narrative content, so I watch a lot of news. That's how I absorb it. Or programs about Taiwanese society. They are like, there is one show that I really like. I forgot the name, but there is the host introducing a topic, and they have guests discussing that topic. And the fun thing on that show is that the host is like very well trained in speaking Taiwanese, but the guests are not. They do speak it, but they're not trained. So once they start speaking, halfway through, it's like someone press a switch, and then it's suddenly in Mandarin, and then they realize that, oh wait, why am I in Mandarin? And then they go back to Taiwanese. It's quite fascinating. But that's just something that many people do in their day-to-day lives. I've watched Taiwanese series, Where are we? No, I can't sing. I have watched the series. If you by chance have watched that, what's the language to people? I haven't watched it, sorry. Especially if it's a story. I just always start something and never finish it. That's why my Netflix queue is like a mile long. But speaking of Netflix, there was a Taiwanese language show on Netflix. But the thing with, I don't know about other Asian countries, but the thing with at least Hong Kong and Taiwan drama shows is that they are like super long. Like usual Netflix shows, like 8 episodes, right? And that one is like 30 or something. And each one is 1 hour long, so I couldn't finish it. But it was quite interesting. Again, it's a historical drama, because that's the only way they could find an excuse to have people speak the language, apparently. What have you learned about Taiwan learning Taiwanese that you wouldn't have learned in Mandarin? Oh, that is very deep. That could be another talk altogether. I think, to me, language does embed some of the culture in it, especially the idioms that we had like in the previous lecture. But I haven't gotten to that stage yet. I'm sort of like a middle, intermediate stage. But I think through the process of learning Taiwanese, I've interacted with a lot of different aspects of that society. Granted, they're a little bit biased, because internet keyboard warriors, they tend to have a certain kind of worldview. But I've learned a lot more about the country and what did I say? No, delete that. I've learned a lot about the island and how they feel about their society. And that's all I'm going to say, because I'm already in trouble. If you could give someone one reason to learn Taiwanese, what would that be? Assuming they're a foreigner with no connections with Taiwan. That's a very good question. I think it depends on the person, really. For most people, I guess it's like most minority languages. There's not much reason to learn it unless you live there and want to use it in your daily life. But since we're all language nerds here, I think it is quite unique within the sort of Sinitic language family. For you guys, I think that's a good reason. With the sounds and everything, and the crazy like tone change circle. How many seats do the Taiwanese MPs take in the parliament if the number is fixed? Which political... Are you sure you want to go into that? First of all, which parliament are we talking about? Like, there's like different parliaments. What? Do you mean like the Taiwanese-speaking MPs? Because, I mean, they're all Taiwanese in terms of nationality. So... Okay, as far as I know, in the parliament, they basically use Mandarin. As is the case with lots of minority languages, they have provisions for using the language, but nobody really does it unless it's a statement. And I had a conversation earlier today, right? If you're a minority language and you speak it when the majority language is expected, you're making a political statement. So that's sort of the same case here. But I think, speaking of Taiwanese parliament, there's much more interesting things to look at there than languages. They do crazy stuff there, if you know about it, fights and everything. But yeah, I think that's a fun note to end on. Thank you very much. Hope I didn't stop you from having your lunch. 等一下。